Okay, so this talk is all about writing more succinct C#, and this is based on a blog post I wrote just over a week ago. And this is quite a long blog post. This is just a screenshot. I will share a link to this in the chat a bit later. But this is the general premise. So, so basically, taking this kind of code and turning it into here. And this, surprisingly, this blog post kind of went a bit viral. Well, viral from my point of view, anyway. I think this is the most retweets and likes I've ever had on Reddit, and it went to the top of the .NET subreddit, and it did this to my traffic, so that was quite amazing. Yeah, so the general premise is I see a lot of code like this on the left where it's quite verbose and bloated for me and I personally don't find this very readable because it takes a while, you've got to go through looking what it's doing. So it's a method. You're getting items from some repository. We're creating a list. We're going through the list. We're creating a new list, a new instance of a different type. So it's quite hard to read. But then if you look over to the right-hand side, if you understand LINQ, you can see straight away it's getting items from a repository. It's doing a projection to another type. So at a glance, you can see what this is doing, and you can see, and I'll talk through this more in a second. But if we just jump over to Rider now, so this is the code on the left. And I want to show first how easy it is to let, I want to show how easy it is to just let the ID help you out. So we're going to start off with this block here. So there's something called the ternary if statement, which is this kind of syntax where you've got some kind of condition, then do this, else do that. So that's the syntax of the ternary if statement. And a surefire hint that you can switch something to the ternary if statement is if you've got an if-else where they're both assigning to the same property or variable, or another one is if they're both returning. But here we can see we've got green squigglies under the if. I can do Alt-Enter, and nothing happens. Great, so I think Zoom has taken over my Alt-Enter keyboard shortcut, so I'll do it here. Normally Alt-Enter would do it. And this is, nothing's working. I don't know whether this is because I'm sharing my screen. I should have tried this earlier. I'll do it manually, but you can let the ID do this for you. Well, basically this would change it from, the ID would do this manually for you. You could do equals some condition. Yeah, none of my, I think Zoom screen sharing is breaking all my features that you could do. So I've not even got auto completion here, so which is a bit of a pain. But you can do item dot, yes, in the field. Otherwise, do assign it to this. It's annoying I can't show you the ID doing its thing. So. So that simplified that a lot. Another thing is here, we've got, and again, the ID will be telling you this, we're instantiating an object, and then we're separately creating all the different properties. So this could be an object initializer, so we can make this inline as well. Again, Rider isn't doing anything. So that then becomes cleaner. Another thing we've got is we've got this completely pointless local variable assignment. We could just do it in line. Oh, sorry, I think Zoom is taking over all my keyboard shortcuts. We can do this kind of thing in line. So I'm making it smaller. Now, all we're doing here is we've got a for each loop, and we're adding to another list. So this is the perfect example of LINQ. So we can just take the items.select. Again, I'm doing all this without IntelliSense, but you can just project that onto this new type. I think that's right. And then we don't even need this results local assignment, so we can get rid of this and just do var. And then we could give it a name, but we don't even need this local variable, so we could just return. Oops. This goes a lot smoother if I can actually use the ID to do it. But we can do this kind of thing. So this is already looking a lot smaller. We don't need this. Now at this point, our entire method is an expression, not an expression body member. So not a statement. It's the return that makes it a statement. So again, we could let the ID do it, but I'm going to have to do it manually. We could turn this into an expression body member. So that gets rid of the braces, and it also gets rid of the return statement. So suddenly we're much more succinct. And as I mentioned before, it's looking a lot more readable like this, especially if you're used to LINQ and more functional programming. So as you can probably tell by now, I'm a big fan of LINQ. I could explain this code to my mum. I think it's really readable. Obviously, you can get some horrible LINQ statements, but for simple stuff like this, it becomes really readable and much more succinct. I've already mentioned expression body members. So if we've got like a method that is just returning an expression, it could be a value, it could be a LINQ expression, then it just means that the return, these braces are redundant, and we can do something much simpler like this. Ternary if statements we've already spoken about. So again, I mentioned if you're assigning to the same variable type or the same property, that you've got this duplication here, and that's a surefire sign that you can change to a ternary if statement. You get rid of, because foo is being assigned within a block here, then this has to be declared separately. You can't use var here at all. So here we can do var foo equals. So it's a bit more in line, but not with all ternary if statements. But with this particular example, this could be taken even further, and you could go to the null coalescing operator. So here we've got bar is not equal to null. This does the same thing. So it's saying if bar's null, then it will carry on evaluating to the right. If it's not null, it's just going to stop here and assign that. This is new in C#8, which is really nice. This is fantastic for initialization, where you're initializing something. You can just do this. So here we've got my value equals null, then assign it. This does the same. So if my value isn't null, then it'll stop evaluating to the right, and it'll just leave my value alone. If my value is null, then it'll carry on evaluating to the right. The null conditional operator. So this is another nice piece of syntax sugar. So in this example, if A, B, or C was null, this alone would throw a null reference exception. So you've got to have all this stuff up here to check. If you're using the null conditional operator, then you can do this. So these question marks. So for example, if B was null, then it would just stop evaluating to the right, and this expression would evaluate to null. So if you're doing var something equals this, then B would be, and B was null, then something would be assigned null, otherwise it would carry on evaluating to the right. So just a point about all these different operators. They're much more composable into larger expressions. So for example, here where you've got this if statement, you can't combine this as part of a larger expression, but things like this you can. C# switch expression, so this is C#8, so this is new in C#8. This example was taken from the documentation, a screenshot. It should be fairly obvious what this is doing, but instead of the typical case blocks we're used to here, we're just returning an expression. So you can see that the C# team are really pushing towards expressions rather than statements. And it means, because it's an expression, it means you don't have to have the return statement, so you don't have to have breaks. And then this is another example, because the switch expression is an expression, it can go into an expression body member. We're passing in string. If that string is null, throw an argument null exception. If it's an empty string, throw argument exception. Otherwise, you can do some kind of pattern matching. And this is a very simple example of pattern matching, just to keep it simple. But you can do some quite advanced stuff with pattern matching. And again, we're just saying if it's greater than 100, then return a long string. And this is the default. So if it's this, then return short string. So a very, very simple, silly example, but I just think these are really powerful. This is probably one of my favorite features. Unnecessary local variables. So this is something I see a lot. This method is getting items from Azure Table Storage. So we've got var table storage equals storage account.parse, table client equals create table client, table reference equals get table reference, query equals new query, results, you don't even need to store that at all. So you can see there's lots of repetition here, which could be made a lot simpler. And this is, we could chain these together and it's nice and clean. It's just as readable. I think this is more readable, especially when you're used to fluent syntax. None of these obviously have error checking or logging or anything, so you might have to do more than this. It might not be able to be an expression body member, but it's kind of, and I'm not saying don't use local variables, I'm just saying use it with intent, because blindly assigning a local variable to every single line, you don't need to do that. So only use a local variable if you need to use it. var, again, I see lots of code like this, so it's so much duplication. If you're using var, that's not dynamically typed, it's still statically typed. It compiles down to the same thing. So this is just a lot cleaner. I use var for everything and I've used it for many years. I have never had a reason to wish that I'd done it in this format. So this is probably the most controversial part of my blog post. And I'm not saying either way. I'm not saying do it one way or another. I just struggle with this left-hand side where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 redundant lines, because we're indenting our code anyway. To me, this is much, much, much more cleaner. However, every time this gets brought up, someone's going to mention this Apple bug, which there's always someone that points out this one. I struggle that with one person wrote a bug, and all code has to be bloated like this from now on because of that bug. Your editor would reformat this so it wouldn't look like this anyway, so unless you're coding in Notepad. Also, to me, that stands out like a sore thumb anyway. One issue that did concern me, which I saw in Stack Overflow, is this one. And these two bits of code are the same thing. If you format this, you'll see that the else bar is indented incorrectly. It's this one. So I agree with these comments on the bottom. So this isn't me. Someone was saying that, and they were reading all the answers cynically until they saw this one. So as I say, I'm not saying, I'm not recommending one or the other. I'm just saying that I personally think that's so much nicer. So to summarize, I thought I was overrunning about loads of time. So to summarize, writing code in this format is basically less code to reason about. It's easier when you're used to reading functional code and LINQ to see what's going on at a glance. Writing these smaller, more succinct things more pushes towards writing methods that adhere to the single responsibility principle, writing pure functions. So they're going to be less buggy, more maintainable, and easier to test. As mentioned before, you can see that this C# is trying to push more towards having things that are expressions rather than statements. And all this is native C#. We're not introducing funky libraries to do functional programming. It's all, that's what the C# team want you to use. This is built-in stuff. And given I've got more time, I wanted to raise, so I've got another minute and a half. This was one of the comments on my blog post. So I won't read the whole thing, but this bit points out that this on the left, he thinks it's good that it's convenient to add additional logic when necessary. So this raises a really good point. I've worked with lots and lots of code bases, and the ones that have been a nightmare to maintain are the ones with methods that are pages long with lots of if statements, lots of blocks, lots of it's just so hard. And that's because people are jumping in, adding more functionality in a rush and adding additional logic when necessary. So he's saying that that's better because you can do this. I say that's a really bad thing. And I mentioned this in the blog post. But so that's me. So hopefully that was useful.